First impressions. The crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Cultural Center cast prismatic rainbows across marble floors as Manhattan's elite filtered through the grand entrance. Marcus Blackwood adjusted his platinum cufflinks and surveyed the crowd with practiced eyes, mentally cataloging net worths and social connections. At 34, he'd mastered the art of reading rooms full of money, and tonight's charity art auction promised to be particularly lucrative for networking. "Mr. Blackwood, welcome back," the doorman greeted him with professional warmth. Marcus nodded curtly, already scanning for familiar faces among the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The evening's cause supporting emerging artists from underserved communities was noble enough, though Marcus viewed it primarily as another opportunity to be seen by the right people. He made his way toward the coat check, shrugging off his custom Italian overcoat. The attendant behind the polished counter had her head down, efficiently organizing tickets and hangers with fluid precision. Something about her graceful movements caught his attention, and when she looked up to accept his coat, Marcus felt a jolt of recognition. Elena Vasquez? The name escaped his lips before he could stop himself. The woman's dark eyes met his with calm composure. "Hello, Marcus. It's been quite some time." Marcus stared, his mind racing back to Columbia University, to late-night study sessions where Elena would quietly work on her theater major assignments, while he and his roommate, Jake, discussed their grand plans for Wall Street domination. She'd always been Jake's girlfriend, and serious, thoughtful, with paint-stained fingers and dreams of transforming community spaces through art. Wow, I didn't expect to see you here," Marcus said, unable to mask his surprise. "Working. The coat check, I mean." Elena's smile remained steady as she hung his coat with care, her movements unhurried despite the growing line behind him. "Life takes interesting turns, doesn't it?" Marcus felt an uncomfortable mixture of awkwardness and something that might have been pity. Here he was, a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious investment firms, while Elena, brilliant, passionate Elena, who'd once talked about changing the world through art, was taking coats at a charity event. "It certainly does," he replied, his tone carrying an unintended note of condescension. "Though I have to say, I always thought you'd end up running some big theater company or arts foundation by now. You were so—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Idealistic back then." "And you thought idealism wouldn't pay the bills?" Elena asked, her voice gentle, but with an edge that made Marcus shift uncomfortably. "Well, you know how it is. The real world has a way of humbling artistic ambitions." Marcus attempted a sympathetic smile that came across as patronizing. "But hey, at least you're still connected to the arts world, right? Even if it's from a different angle." Elena's expression remained unreadable as she handed him his coat check ticket. Indeed, from a very different angle. As Marcus walked away, pocketing the ticket, he couldn't shake the image of Elena's composed face. There had been something in her eyes, not embarrassment or defeat, as he might have expected, but something else entirely. Something that looked almost like amusement. The main gallery buzzed with conversation as guests examined the evening's featured pieces. Marcus accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and began his usual ritual of strategic mingling. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the coat check counter. He found himself wondering what had happened to Elena's dreams, how someone with her intelligence and passion had ended up in such a modest position. Perhaps it was the wine, or perhaps it was the slight smugness that came with his own success, but Marcus felt a twinge of satisfaction. He'd made the right choices, taken the practical path, while Elena had clearly learned the hard way that artistic dreams rarely translated to financial stability. The evening stretched ahead, full of possibility and potential connections, but first impressions, Marcus would soon discover, could be devastatingly wrong. Hidden foundations. The evening progressed with clockwork precision. though Marcus barely noticed the seamless orchestration happening around him. He moved through the galleries, wine glass in hand, engaging in the familiar dance of high society. Networking. Conversations flowed about market volatility, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and children's acceptances to Ivy League schools. "Marcus, fantastic to see you here," boomed Richard Castellanos, a real estate mogul whose developments dotted Manhattan's skyline. "Have you met my wife, Patricia? She's on the board here." As they exchanged pleasantries, Marcus noticed Patricia's eyes light up when she mentioned the evening's organization. "This venue has become absolutely transformative for the arts community. The programming here rivals Lincoln Center, and the community outreach initiatives are groundbreaking." "The management must be exceptional," Marcus observed, accepting another champagne from a server who appeared at precisely the right moment. "Oh, it is. Visionary leadership from the top down. Every detail is considered, from accessibility programs to artist residencies. We've never seen anything quite like it in the cultural sector." Marcus nodded politely, though his attention wandered as he spotted Elena moving purposefully through the crowd. She'd changed from her coat-check attire into a simple black dress that somehow managed to look both professional and elegant. What struck him wasn't her appearance, but the way she moved, with the confidence of someone who belonged, not the hurried deference he'd expect from event staff. He watched as she approached. A small group gathered around one of the featured sculptures. The artist, a young woman with nervous energy, was struggling to explain her work to potential buyers, who seemed more interested in the investment value than the artistic vision. The intersection of traditional techniques with contemporary social commentary creates a dialogue that challenges viewers to examine their own assumptions, Elena said, joining the conversation seamlessly. Her voice carried genuine understanding as she gestured toward the piece. "Notice how the bronze elements represent permanence while the glass components suggest fragility, a metaphor for how social change requires both strength and delicacy." Buyers leaned in, suddenly engaged. The young artist's face transformed with gratitude as Elena continued. "This piece specifically addresses housing insecurity in urban environments, drawing from the artist's own experiences growing up in transitional housing." Marcus found himself drawn closer, intrigued despite himself. Elena spoke with authority about technique, provenance, and artistic significance. This wasn't casual knowledge, it was expertise. "You seem quite knowledgeable about the collection," one of the buyers remarked. "I make it my business to understand every piece we showcase," Elena replied with a smile that held depths. Marcus was beginning to realize he'd completely misjudged Dot as the group moved on. Several stopping to shake Elena's hand and exchange business cards, Marcus intercepted her. "Path. That was impressive," he admitted. "You really know your stuff. Are you working in arts administration now? Consulting, maybe?" Elena paused, studying his face with those same dark eyes that had held such composure at the coat check. "Something like that. Look, Elena, I hope I didn't come across as insensitive earlier. It's just seeing you working the coat check when you are always so passionate about theater and art. It seemed like such a waste of your talents. Did it?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "And what makes you think working coat check would be beneath someone's talents?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "That's not what I meant. Every person here tonight contributes to making this evening successful. The security guards protecting priceless artwork, the servers ensuring guests feel welcomed, the technical crew managing lighting and sound there. Work has dignity and value." Elena's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Perhaps the waste isn't in honest work, but in the assumption that a person's worth can be measured by their job title. Before Marcus could respond, a well-dressed couple approached Elena with obvious familiarity. "Elena, darling, the Rothschild piece is absolutely stunning. Will it be part of the permanent collection?" the woman asked. We're still in discussions. With the artist about a long-term installation, Elena replied smoothly. But I'm hopeful we can reach an agreement that serves both the work and our mission. Marcus watched the exchange with growing confusion. Elena spoke like someone with decision-making authority, not an employee seeking approval. The couple treated her with deference that went beyond professional courtesy. It was respect. As they walked away, Marcus struggled to reconcile what he was witnessing with his earlier assumptions. Nothing about Elena's behavior suggested someone grateful for modest employment. Instead, she moved through the space like someone who understood its rhythms intimately, someone whose opinions mattered. The evening's program was about to begin, and Marcus found his certainty about first impressions beginning to crack. The revelation, the soft chime of crystal against crystal, echoed through the grand gallery as guests began gravitating toward the main auction space. Marcus positioned himself strategically near the front, close enough to demonstrate serious buying intent, but far enough back to observe the room's power dynamics. The evening's lots included pieces from established masters, alongside works from emerging artists, a combination that typically drew both serious collectors and social climbers. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would please take your seats, we'll begin this evening's program momentarily, announced a sophisticated woman in burgundy silk, whom Marcus recognized as the auction house's senior director. The crowd settled into elegant gilt chairs arranged theater-style before a small stage. Marcus noted the careful orchestration servers discreetly refreshing drinks, lighting adjustments that highlighted both the artwork and the audience. Even the temperature seemed perfectly calibrated. This level of execution required serious expertise and significant resources. Before we begin tonight's auction, I have the distinct honor of introducing someone whose vision has transformed not just this space, but our entire understanding of how art can serve community, the director continued. Please join me in welcoming the founder and creative director of the Metropolitan Cultural Center, Elena Vasquez. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He turned sharply toward the stage, certain he'd miss her. But there was Elena rising from a front row seat he hadn't noticed her occupying. The simple black dress he'd seen her wearing moments earlier was revealed, as she moved into the stage lights, to be an exquisitely tailored creation that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The applause was warm and sustained, not polite acknowledgement, but genuine appreciation. Marcus felt his mouth go dry as Elena stepped behind the podium with the natural confidence of someone accustomed addressing rooms full of influential people. Thank you all for being here tonight. Elena began, her voice carrying easily through the space without seeming amplified. When my grandmother cleaned offices in buildings like this one 40 years ago, she would tell me stories about the beautiful things she glimpsed through boardroom doors, paintings and sculptures that seemed to exist in a world separate from hers. Marcus gripped his program tighter, his mind racing to process what he was hearing. She dreamed that someday art wouldn't be locked away behind doors of privilege, but would flow freely between communities, creating bridges instead of barriers. Tonight's auction supports our Emerging Artist Residency program, which has already provided studio space, mentorship, and exhibition opportunities to over 200 artists from underrepresented communities. The audience hung on every word. Marcus recognized several faces in the crowd: museum board members, arts patrons, collectors whose opinions shaped market trends. They weren't listening out of politeness. They were genuinely engaged with Elena's vision. The Metropolitan Cultural Center represents more than just another venue for artistic display. It's a living laboratory where established artists collaborate with emerging voices, where community engagement drives curatorial decisions, and where accessibility isn't an afterthought but a foundational principle. Elena's eyes swept the audience, and for a moment her gaze landed on Marcus. There was no malice in her expression, no triumph, just a quiet acknowledgment of the evening's earlier exchange. Each piece in tonight's auction was selected not just for its artistic merit, but for its ability to spark dialogue about our shared humanity. Art has the power to challenge assumptions, to expand empathy, to help us see familiar things from radically different perspectives. Marcus felt the heat of embarrassment creep up his neck. Every word seemed aimed at his own narrow worldview, though he knew Elena was addressing the room broadly. "I want to share something personal," Elena continued. "Earlier this evening, someone expressed surprise at seeing me in what they perceived as a humble position. But there is no humble work, only humble attitudes toward work. The security guard protecting these masterpieces, the curator preserving cultural heritage, the educator opening young minds to beauty all contribute to something larger than themselves." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that she'd been working. Coat check not out of necessity, but likely as some kind of statement or tradition he was too limited to understand. "My grandmother taught me that dignity comes not from others' recognition of your worth, but from your own recognition of the worth in what you do." Tonight, we celebrate artists who create not for validation, but for the pure necessity of expression. As Elena introduced the evening's featured artists, Marcus sat frozen in his chair, his earlier smugness replaced by a creeping sense of mortification. The woman he'd pitied, whose life he'd dismissed as a cautionary tale, had built something extraordinary while he'd been climbing someone else's ladder. The auction was about to begin, but Marcus barely registered the announcer's voice. He was too busy recalculating everything he thought he knew about success, about Elena, and about himself. Uncomfortable truths. The auction proceeded with practiced elegance, but Marcus found himself unable to focus on the bidding wars unfolding before him. Each lot that sold often, for prices that exceeded estimates, seemed to underscore his fundamental misunderstanding of the evening's true significance. This wasn't merely a charity auction. It was a carefully curated showcase of Elena's influence within the art world. Lot 17, Urban Sanctuary by Maria Santos, opens at $15,000, the auctioneer announced. The mixed media installation had been one of the pieces Elena discussed earlier, and Marcus watched as serious collectors drove the price to $43,000. The young artist Maria stood near the side of the room, tears streaming down her face as applause erupted. Elena had returned to her seat in the front row, but Marcus noticed how artists, collectors, and board members continually approached her during brief intermissions. These weren't courtesy visits, they were consultations. People sought her opinion, her approval, her insight. She was clearly the evening's true center of gravity. During a pause between lots, Marcus overheard fragments of conversations around him that painted an increasingly uncomfortable picture of his own ignorance. Elena's revolutionized arts funding. "In this city," whispered Patricia Castellanos behind him, "the community partnerships she's developed have become models for cultural institutions nationwide. Did you know she turned down the Whitney's offer to become their director?" added another voice. "Said she wasn't interested in managing existing prestige when she could build something transformative from the ground up." Marcus felt increasingly small in his seat. The Whitney Museum, one of the most prestigious positions in the art world, had courted Elena, while he'd assumed she was grateful for coat check work. When the formal auction concluded, raising over $2 million for the artist residency program, Elena returned to the podium for closing remarks. The room fell silent with genuine anticipation. "Tonight's success belongs to everyone in this room," she began, "but most especially to the artists whose courage in sharing their vision makes gatherings like this possible. Art doesn't exist in isolation. It requires community, support, and the willingness to see beauty in unexpected places." Her words carried weight beyond mere gratitude. Marcus recognized the cadence of someone accustomed to being heard, someone whose opinions shaped policy and budgets. I want to address something that's been on my mind this evening. Too often, we make assumptions about people based on limited information, their appearance, their current circumstances, the work we see them doing in a single moment. But every person carries invisible histories, hidden depths, dreams deferred or transformed, rather than abandoned. Marcus felt heat flood his face. While Elena wasn't looking directly at him, her words felt precisely targeted. My grandmother spent decades cleaning buildings owned by people who never learned her name. But she was also a poet who wrote in 3 languages, a woman who raised 5 children, while supporting her community through countless small acts of generosity. Her worth wasn't diminished by her job title, it was revealed through her character. The audience listened with rapt attention. Marcus noticed several people nodding, as if Elena was articulating something they'd long felt, but struggled to express. The coat check attendant might be a doctoral candidate studying social justice. The security guard might be a veteran supporting 3 generations of family. The server might be an entrepreneur building her own catering business. We impoverish ourselves when we reduce people to their most visible function. Elena's gaze swept the room, and this time when her eyes met Marcus's, he couldn't look away. There was no anger in her expression, but there was something more unsettling disappointment, mixed with compassion. This institution exists to challenge perspectives, to expand empathy, to remind us that surface appearances rarely tell complete stories. Tonight, through your generous support, we're ensuring that emerging artists have platforms to share their truths, regardless of their backgrounds or current circumstances. The standing ovation that followed was immediate and sustained. Marcus found himself clapping mechanically, his mind reeling with the implications of everything he'd witnessed. Elena hadn't just succeeded despite his earlier dismissal. She'd built something meaningful while he'd been accumulating wealth without purpose. As the evening wound down and guests began moving toward the reception area, Marcus remained in his seat, paralyzed by the scope of his misjudgment. He'd spent years congratulating himself on his success, but what had he actually built? What legacy was he creating beyond his investment portfolio? Alana's words echoed in his mind. We impoverish ourselves when we reduce people to their most visible function. Tonight, he discovered just how impoverished his perspective had become. The question now was whether he had the courage to examine what lay beneath his own surface assumptions about success, worth, and what it truly meant to make a difference in the world. New perspectives. The reception area gradually emptied as the evening wound down, leaving behind the pleasant hum of meaningful conversations and the lingering energy of a successful event. Marcus found himself standing alone near a striking abstract painting, his untouched champagne growing warm in his hand. The city sparkled beyond the windows, but for once, the view failed to fill him with his usual sense of conquest over the urban landscape. Elena appeared beside him with the quiet grace he was beginning to recognize as her signature, never rushed, never performing, simply present. Contemplating your next acquisition? She asked, nodding toward the painting. Marcus let out a hollow laugh. Honestly, I'm contemplating how spectacularly wrong I've been about everything. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last clusters of guests saying their goodbyes. Marcus noticed how many people sought Elena out for personal farewells, not perfunctory social obligations, but genuine expressions of gratitude and connection. I keep thinking about what you said earlier, Marcus continued, about reducing people to their most visible function. I realize that's exactly what I've done to myself. Elena turned to face him fully. How so? I became so focused on being successful, on meeting everyone's expectations of what success looks like, that I stopped asking whether I was building anything worth having. He gestured vaguely at the room around them. You've created something. That matters. I've just accumulated things that inflate my net worth. Success isn't binary, Marcus. There's value in financial stability, in professional achievement. The question is whether those things serve a purpose beyond themselves. Marcus watched as Maria Santos passed by, still glowing from the evening's validation. Earlier, when he'd seen Elena talking with struggling artists, he'd assumed it was charity work. Now he understood it was investment, not in financial returns, but in human potential. I don't even know where to start, he admitted. I've spent 15 years optimizing for the wrong metrics. How do you rebuild a life when you're not sure what you actually care about? Elena smiled, and for the first time that evening, it reached her eyes completely. You start by paying attention, not to stock prices or quarterly reports, but to the world around you, to problems that need solving, to people who need support, to possibilities you've been too busy to notice. That sounds terrifyingly vague for someone who lives by spreadsheets and strategic plans. Then make it concrete. What bothers you about the world? What would you change if you could? Marcus considered the question seriously. Images flashed through his mind: young entrepreneurs struggling to access capital, brilliant minds trapped by circumstance, communities abandoned by traditional financial institutions. I see incredible potential in people that existing systems ignore, he said slowly. Entrepreneurs from backgrounds that don't fit venture capital's usual patterns. Ideas that could transform communities, but don't promise billion-dollar exits. Now, you're talking about purpose, Elena said. The infrastructure you've built in finance, those relationships, that expertise, that access to capital could serve different goals. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Wellington approached with his coat draped over his arm. Elena, magnificent evening as always. Marcus, good to see you here. Are you collecting these days? I'm trying to figure out what's worth collecting. Marcus replied honestly. Wellington chuckled. Spoken like someone having a crisis of meaning. Elena has that effect on people. She makes you question whether accumulating beautiful objects is the same as creating beauty. After Wellington departed, Elena and Marcus found themselves alone again. The space felt different, now less formal, more intimate, as if the evening's public performance had given way to genuine conversation. I have a confession, Elena said. When I saw you earlier, I almost didn't engage. I thought you were the same person from college, brilliant but narrow, successful but unexamined. I was. I probably still am, mostly. But you're questioning now. That's the beginning of everything worthwhile. Elena paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. There's a venture fund I've been considering launching focused on social impact investing, specifically supporting entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. I've got the vision and the network, but I could use someone who understands traditional finance structures. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, not with the familiar thrill of a lucrative opportunity, but with something entirely different: the possibility of alignment between his skills and his emerging sense of purpose. You'd trust me with that? After tonight? Tonight showed me you're capable of growth. That's rarer and more valuable than you might think. Alana's expression grew serious. But it would mean giving up some of the financial rewards you're accustomed to. Impact investing requires patience with longer timelines and more complex definitions of success. Marcus looked around the room one final time, seeing it now as Elena's vision made manifest a space where art, community, and commerce intersected, to create something larger than their individual components. I think, he said carefully, I'm ready to learn new ways of measuring success. Elena smiled. Then let's schedule that coffee. We have a lot to discuss. As they walked toward the exit together, Marcus realized the evening had become something he'd never experienced before, not a networking opportunity or a social obligation, but a genuine transformation. The man leaving the building was fundamentally different from the one who had entered, though the work of becoming that new person was just beginning.